Hi, and welcome back. In this lecture, we can talk about key insight 2, environmental, social, and governance, or what we call ESG frameworks. So due to the mainstream discussion of things like pollution, microplastics, global warming, climate change, sustainability, there's a massive shift for companies to focus much more than profit and loss than numbers and spreadsheets, to focus on a much more holistic picture, to focus on things like the environment, the benefit of the company towards the society, and having good governance frameworks both within the company and with external parties. So due to that reason, the ESG, or what we call environmental, social, and governance frameworks, have gained a lot of popularity in the recent past. So ESG frameworks have three components. The first is the environmental component. So the environmental component focuses on factors like climate change and sustainability strategy of the company, and even things like biodiversity. So factors like what's the negative impact that the company's operations have on the biodiversity, especially if the company is a manufacturing plant or something like a construction plant, or even things like mining for natural resources and heavy metals. Then we have things like natural resources. So what's the utilization of natural resources? And is it sourced sustainably? What about things like land pollution and the degradation of the land, things like losing all the nutrients in the land? Is the soil being infertile? And all these factors. Then we come to pollution and waste management. So how is pollution addressed? So not only the land pollution, but also things like water pollution, air pollution, sound pollution. So is the sound levels of machinery disturbing the natural habitat and disturbing the wildlife, and those kind of factors as well. Then we have the S factor, or the social factor. So that focuses on universal human rights. So whether you have strong HR protocols and human resources practices, universal human rights enforced in your workplace. For example, things like providing safety equipment and ensuring that the workers have a living wage, and ensuring occupational health and safety within the working environment, and factors like that. And also factors like human capital development. So are you providing adequate opportunities for the workforce to grow? What about sharing the best practices with them? Is there a training and development program to groom them and sort of improve their life? So that's sort of a thing. Then there's occupational health and safety, or OHS. So things like providing safety equipment, goggles, and also warning signs, and also things like alarms when moving equipment, and that sort of a thing. Then there's child labor. So is child labor abolished in our working environment, and does it indirectly support child labor? So that sort of a thing. So the S factor is basically taking into consideration the societal benefits or the impact that it has on society. For example, things like the worker's lifestyle and so many other factors. Then we come to the governance factor, or G. So this focuses on basically having the right frameworks, the accountability, compliance frameworks in place, along with diversity, equity, inclusivity, and many other factors that promotes healthy governance. So the main thing is the diversity of the board. So does the management of the company have different people, different diverse people? And also, are you giving equal employment opportunities for people of different color, race, religion, ethnicity, country, sexual orientation, and other similar factors? Then we come to business ethics. So are you transparent in all your transactions? And are you holding the values and principles that you have defined in your website, not just merely leaving it as a blind statement on your website? Are you living up to those values and principles? Can you be trusted to do the right thing with your stakeholders, partners, and customers? So factors like that. Then we have the corporate governance framework. So how do you address things like bribery, corruption, and also things like sexual harassment in the workplace? Are you abiding with the laws and regulations that govern the country? And also a lot of things are done online these days. So things like data protection and privacy. Are you protecting the data of the customers? And also, have you got consent from the customers to store, analyze, process, and share the data of the customers, and that sort of a thing. So things like aligning with the consumers and stakeholders. So consumers are increasingly getting aware of the value of the importance of supporting companies that align with their own values, principles, and ethical commitments, including commitment to information confidentiality. So things like data privacy, environmental protection, animal rights, giving back to the local community, equality, and inclusivity. So are you listening to the consumers? Are you listening to the investors and aligning your business strategy to become more sustainable? So we're seeing a lot of pressure on companies to direct their investments towards much more healthier and sustainable ESG governance frameworks, and also to strategically align their business operations and business objectives and goals, because investors are concerned, and along with consumers, to create a much more sustainable future. Then we have factors like building and maintaining a strong brand image. So a strong ESG framework in your business would enhance the brand image, reduce risk, and positively impact the revenue and company valuation to improve the overall market perception. So especially the younger generation, millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha are aware of the environmental impact of their purchases of products and services, and they are turning towards much more greener, organic, and sustainable solutions, and companies will have no choice but to adapt to those changes and demands. Then there are several misconceptions and problematic practices of companies regarding implementing ESG or environmental social governance frameworks. The first is the excessive focus on ESG ratings. So just ticking boxes in ESG frameworks to improve the company's rating and perception rather than developing a strong strategy that is customized to the company's unique value proposition and exposure to risk is very, very important. So this ESG framework is very good for companies to understand the risk that they are facing and to make calculated solid return on investments for their future advances. So companies should focus on developing a results-driven and an executionable strategy when it comes to implementing these ratings. Then, treating ratings as a communication effort. So just broadcasting that you have very high ESG ratings by world-leading ESG bodies and not delivering the results that you promise to deliver. Then we have factors like inconsistency across the firms. So lack of a company-wide strategy and coordination, because like we talked about in the agile organization, we need to have the entire company onboarded to this so that everything is aligned perfectly and it works seamlessly without much friction. Then we have things like lack of assessment and monitoring. So lack of measuring and monitoring the metrics of ESG frameworks, inability to assess and determine whether the company's actions are aligned with its intended ESG targets. So there's also difficulty in measuring these ESG framework definitions because, for example, things like social welfare. So how do you measure a company's social welfare or social impact? How do you measure the environmental impact? Because we know that we can't monitor or we can't manage what we can't measure. So how do we measure it? So do we have the right tools and technologies and expertise to measure those impacts and then change accordingly? Well, that's about it for Key Insight 2, Environmental, Social and Governance or ESG Frameworks. I'll see you on another lecture.